Okay, I need everybody to do a little exercise with me here. Ready? Take a deep breath, deep as you can. Just breathe it in, let it go. One more time, breathe in as deep as you can, let it go. Now, do you feel fuller? Do you feel fuller? Does anybody here feel like you just ate a meal? Nobody? Well, let me introduce you to this idea called breatharianism. Has anybody ever heard of this? I want you to look at this couple here. This couple, these are breatharians, and they believe that the energy of the universe by breathing is all you need to sustain yourself. There are nutrients in the air. And supposedly, these people since 2008, only 2 or 3 times a week have either had a little bit of broth or a little bit of fruits and vegetables. And they have a 5 and 2-year-old together, which means that through 2 pregnancies, again, they supposedly practice this method of breatharianism, okay? And I don't know, I've never been pregnant. I've heard that you get hungry. And I would imagine that at some point in the pregnancy, he did something wrong, and she let him know, and she might have gotten a little hangry, and I think a little Snickers would have helped, but that's just me, I'm just saying. But there are people that believe that the energy in the universe can sustain us. Now, I want to introduce you to this guy. His name is Donald Gorski. Now, this guy lives kind of on the opposite end of things. Does this picture give you any idea how he lives? Starting on May 17th, 1972, this guy has had at least 2 Big Macs every day of his life for over 50 years. Can I get an amen for that, maybe? Totally opposite end of the breatharians, this guy, and he maintains a really good weight. He says that the key to like him being healthy, because he's a healthy guy, he's still alive, he's still doing it. He's eaten over 34,000 Big Macs in his life. He's got the world record, so don't even try. Unless you're under 20, then maybe you might give it a shot. So he's the other end. Now, here's the thing about these people is that they're known for these things. The couple that are the breatharians and Donald Gorski, who's the Big Mac guy, that's how they're known. And the question that we've been asking every week is, what makes us different? The series is called Different. What makes us different than everything else? And God calls us to live a life that's different. And not just for different sake, not just because he wants us to be odd or weird or kooky, but he does it for a reason. He wants us to live a different life. And when I hear about people like this, I often think to myself, when I'm all said and done in this life, what will people say? How will they sum up my life? And that's a good question for you to think about. How will your life be summed up when it's all said and done? Because you're going to be known by those around you and maybe even by a little bit of a broader world out there for something. And so that's a really good question for us to start off with. Is like, what will our life be known for? So we're in week 5 of this series called Different. We're going to wrap it up next week. We've got one more week here together, and we're going to be talking about next week again, what does God do for us to help us to live a life that's different, that's set apart, that's unique? And I want to thank you for your prayers. Now, the last couple weeks have been a little bit off rhythm for us. I do an annual writing retreat, and so I've been thinking and praying the last 2 weeks about like where we're going as a church over the next year or so, and so I was able to do that. I was also able to lead our first national prayer conference. I want to show you a couple pictures. We were in Las Vegas and just met some really, really wonderful people that we got to connect with. A lot of prayer leaders from around the country, and this is the first time that I was able to lead this conference. And I just want you to know that God met with us in such a powerful way. There was something very unique, and I always get encouraged when I'm around these great leaders, but I tell you, like, what God was doing amongst us was so almost like tangible in the room. There was such a powerful force as we were there. Now, we went down to the stadium. Listen, I put in all the prayers I could. I did my part. I don't know if you did your part. I feel like maybe somebody in Michigan just wasn't doing their part. Because I tried to pray for the Lions. I guess it just didn't work, but there's always next year, right? There's always next year. But I tried. We went down and we prayed around the stadium and just prayed that God would protect this event that's happening here tonight. And but God is moving in our country. And I walked away so encouraged by what's happening around the world as we see God just moving. And I always want to remind you that God's always moving, God's always speaking, and God has something. And it's when we begin to lose sight that we really get off track. It's when we begin to lose hope. It's when we begin to think that the forces of darkness in this world, because we're just in a battlefield. This life is a struggle. It can be tough. There can be ups and downs. But you know, like God's power, nothing is comparable to it in the world. I just want to remind you of that. Nothing is comparable to what you're facing in your life. So whatever struggle, whatever battle you might be up against right now, even what we've sang this morning so far, lead on, Good Shepherd, and God's will being done. There is something powerful happening as we follow God. And one of the readings this week, it was our first reading of our growth guides, and I always bring one up here because I always like you to see these things. And I forgot to say something before I go further here. Those of you, I know we announced you, but if you were part of the Reset crew and you earned one of these, make sure you pick one of these up. I just want to thank you. As a church, we are really seeing God do something every year as we start off with Reset. So if you're a Resetter, I just want to remind you to pick up your shirt on the way out. All right. So 1 Peter chapter 1, 1 Peter, there's two little books, little letters written by this man. He was a disciple of Jesus, and he has these words of wisdom that he writes to the people that were the early followers of Jesus in history. This is just a few years after Jesus lived on the earth and died on the cross and was resurrected to life and ascended to heaven. And Peter writes these words, and being someone who was right there, a first-hand account of the life of Jesus, it's really precious to have these words. And so this is what he writes to these early followers of Jesus. And he says this: therefore, with minds that are alert and sober, set your hope on the grace to be brought to you when Jesus Christ is revealed at his coming. Listen, Jesus is coming back. Are you ready? Sometimes we look at that and we maybe hear that, we maybe don't understand it. Maybe sometimes, honestly, if we were to really be honest, that the return of Jesus is an inconvenience to think about because, man, we got that vacation planned in a few months. Or he can't come back until the Lions win the Super Bowl. We all know that, right? But he's coming back. It's a good reminder. And so he goes on to say this: as obedient children, do not conform to the evil desires that you had when you lived in ignorance. But just as he who called you is holy, so be holy in all you do, for it is written, be holy because I am holy. And here Peter is giving instructions to these new believers, and these are words that we can definitely take to heart and learn from, because he's saying there that we need to be holy because God is holy. And Peter starts off with a really interesting phrase. And, you know, so I try not to really geek out with the Bible sometimes, but sometimes I just can't help it, because if you know that these original words were not written in English, you probably know that, but they were written in Greek, and so they've got to be translated, and there's different translations of the Bible. So if you hear people talk about a certain translation, and some people ask, well, which one's the best? Well, they all have a different perspective. They're all good. That's what I would say. That if you pretty much pick up any translation, it's good. I use the NIV, the New International Version, when I read here typically on Sundays. But when he says there, prepare, fully alert and sober. Set your heart on the grace brought to you. And he says, with minds that are fully alert. He's talking about prepare yourselves. And this is what he's saying is we got to be ready. So he uses this phrase here in the original Greek that really stands out, and it's something that we have to talk about, because what he says in the original language, he uses this euphemism. He says, you've got to gird up your mind. Now, what does that mean, to gird up your mind? Well, he's using a term there, like we might say, hey, roll up your sleeves and get ready, right? So if you know what that phrase means, roll up your sleeves, like in our culture, it would mean like, roll up your sleeves, not necessarily even physically, but symbolically, and get yourselves ready for something, because it's going to be some work. And here, Peter's saying, look, if you're going to prepare your minds, if you're going to be alert, if you're going to prepare yourself, then what you need to do is you need to gird up your mind. Now, here's what that means. So back in those days, men would typically wear these like flowing robes. And if they were getting ready to be prepared for something, or if they needed to move in an instant's notice, like if they needed to maybe get ready for a strenuous activity or a run, or if there was danger, you couldn't just take off because you had this robe flowing everywhere. So they had these belts, and they would take their robe and they would tuck it in their belt. They would gird their robe and they would get ready to go. And Peter here is using that phrase. He's saying, gird up your mind, prepare your mind, set your mind and get it ready, because in this world you need to be alert and sober. Now, we know the word sober. That word can mean a lot of different things. Peter here is saying, I want you to be ready. I don't want anything to distract you from the moment that you have to have your mind set to be ready. So gird up your mind, tuck it in, and be ready to roll. And so we got to be ready. Now, this faith that we talk about every week, Christianity, it's not an intellectually lazy faith. I think sometimes Christianity, from outsiders, they might look at it and they go, it's all emotion, it's not real, it's not really based on fact, there's not really logic or reason. And so a lot of people don't even really check it out because they think my mind's not really engaged. And here Peter is saying to us, if you're going to be a follower of Jesus, your mind has to be on alert. You have to be ready, and you have to engage your mind in your faith. Now, for some of us, that's easier than others. I think in our society right now, particularly in American culture, one of the things that is such a pitfall for so many people is they base their life on emotion. They base it on how they're feeling on a certain day. So if they're feeling great, the world is great. And if they're not feeling so great, then the world is terrible. And so they might enter into a relationship like that. They might enter their marriage and say, my marriage is great, because they're really on this emotional high. And then when it gets tough, and then when they don't feel like it, then all of a sudden their marriage can struggle. And if you're married, you know what I'm talking about. I mean, I remember when we first got married, and I always think about, I love doing weddings, and I love going to weddings, because weddings, everything's so perfect. You know what I mean? Everything's on point, and everyone looks great. And, the tuxes or whatever the guys are wearing, and the girls always look beautiful, and everything's just all picturesque, and everything's so good, and everyone's feeling so great, and all the emotions are high. And then I think about what follows after that. I think about eventually one day you're going to wake up together and you're going to look over and their hair's not going to be perfect anymore. And their mouth might be hanging open. And there might be a green fog coming out of their mouth. And if they leaned over your salad with their eyes, they could probably provide all the croutons in your salad because all the crusties in their eyelashes. Am I painting a picture here for you? Because you don't feel like it. You look over and you're like, oh man, this isn't like when we got married. This is different. But you can't base your life on emotion. You have to base it on something deeper. And if you go into your career that way, where I'm going to be great at work when I feel good, but when I don't feel good, maybe I'll call in, or I won't show up, or I won't give everything to what I'm getting paid to do. when you start to live that way, it can be a dangerous thing. And I realize sometimes you just don't feel like it, but we cannot approach our faith that way. And the one thing about our family, with Ariane and myself, we have 3 daughters and 2 son-in-laws, like, I'd say not a day goes by that either through Snapchat, Instagram, or text, there's some kind of dog video, even of one of our dogs or somebody else's dog. And I got one the other day, and it just reminded me of what we're talking about. I want you to watch this. Here we go.
Hey, sweetheart. Schloops? Your eyes are open. I know you're awake. Do you want to start your day? I know. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I know. Uh-oh. Uh-oh. It's getting late. It's getting late, bud. All right. Well, you're going to have to, Schloops, you're going to have to get up. You have to go to work. You have to go to work. Oh, man. All right. A few more minutes, that's it. A few more minutes, then you're out.
Sometimes you just don't feel like it. You know what I mean? You just don't feel like it. You don't feel it. But if you base your faith on your feelings, you're going to be growling, you're going to be barking. You have to base it on something so much deeper. And every week we've been sharing different stories of people that are living a life that's different, that's worthy for us to take note of. And I want to introduce someone from our church that some of you know, and he's just a great man that I respect so much. I'm going to invite him to come up. I want you to welcome Dave Beebe. You're the only guy that avoided the steps. See, that tells you a lot about Dave. He just stepped right up. I love that about you. Just like, I'm just getting right up there.
I was less likely to trip with one step.
There you go.
4.
Well, Dave, it's so good to have you up here. And you're a person that when I came to this church, I kept hearing your name. And it's been a joy, and in a good way.
Okay.
It's been such a joy to get to know you. But I want you to tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I grew up over in Bridgeport, Michigan by Frankenmuth, and a bunch of years ago I moved over to Grand Valley to chase my love of football, and I was looking for a hot chick, you know what I mean? And so back in the 80s I moved to Allendale. And,
did you find one?
Oh, you bet.
Okay, good. All right.
Now, I've always questioned her judgment that she stayed with me, but she did. And met my wife, and we got married and had 4 kids. And, you know, I wake up every day. I've just been blessed. I've got some wonderful kids. And I want to make a point. People say it all the time. I laugh at parents that got 10-year-olds, right? They think they got this thing licked. I got wonderful kids, and I've had some sleepless nights thinking about them, and you will too as they get a little bit older, for the record. So I got 4 kids, 2 daughter-in-laws, and a couple grandkids. And, man, I wake up every morning and I just think, so many of us just have so much excess, you know. And I just thank God, I can't believe I've been placed in this time in history, and I don't take it for granted. I mean, what I've got, it's a lot.
Now, another thing that's unique about Dave that I really, really love about him is the fact that for several years, I don't know if you remember how many years, but he has served back in our kids ministry. And I think having a man like you that, you know, I mean, I'm up here and I'm kind of scared of you, honestly. I don't know what it would be like but, you know, these young men, to see a strong man like yourself that's not afraid to show their faith in public or to talk about it. And you've been leading our kids. And, you know, we were just talking about this earlier. What would you say, just this is kind of off to the side here, but to any man that might consider working with our children or with our students here at Daybreak?
Well, first off, to grow in your faith, you need to do something. You know, I didn't grow up in church, and I meet all kinds of people, and in my mind, I separate religious people from people pursuing Christ. And if you just sit in church on Sunday, when you feel like it, you just will not mature. And again, I wasn't raised in the church, but my kids started coming here. My wife and my kids started coming here, and I was busy hunting and fishing all the time. And my oldest son got really connected with the youth group as a conversation about that. And I figured it was time for me to grow up a little bit and lead my family. And I might as well start coming. My wife and my kids are. And that was at the early ages of my growth. I was kind of agnostic at the time. But it didn't take long, and I'm like, if I'm going to be here, I'm helping. And I've been teaching down there ever since.
Yeah. So, Dave, let's talk about that change in your life, your faith background, a little bit about that, and then what changed for you.
Well, again, I grew up with great parents. They didn't teach me a lot about God, though. They taught me a lot about don't be a complainer. Boy, that'd be a great lesson, isn't it? Quit complaining. And they also taught me a lot about if you got a problem, it's probably your own fault, more than likely. Look in the mirror and address you. So those were great lessons. But quick story, a lot of you guys know this story. A customer of mine at the time, Christian guy, that was my perception of him. I wasn't going to church. His daughter passed away at this church. Now, I just remember logically looking at this man going, how could he manage something so terrible, right? If it wasn't for some depth in his faith. And it didn't mean he didn't cry. It doesn't mean he wouldn't cry today about it. But I could just tell as an agnostic, this cat ran his life differently than all these religious people that I met. And he managed this. He's become one of my best friends. And God just kept putting people in my life that were strong, unashamed Christian men, good in business. And they weren't afraid to talk about it. And I think that's an easy way to separate religious people from people pursuing Christ. You can't help but talk about it.
Yeah.
If you're not talking about it, I'm sorry, you're not growing up. You're not engaged,
Yeah.
It's just that
Yeah,
simple.
that's good. So this really became, I know for a lot of people, coming into faith might be very emotional. And we're all wired differently. And we've been talking about emotions here, I want you to know that emotion is an important part of who we are. We shouldn't ignore it. But Dave, for you, it was a lot more intellectual, where you saw someone and then you began to just think about the reason, the logic, and look into Christianity. And then you ended up giving your life to Christ. And what's happened since? What's life been like after that?
Well, here's a caution. My life was really good before I knew Jesus, just for the record. And I think a lot of people are like that. And I think that's why we're lazy. I mean, this country was built on Judeo-Christian values, and we've just got lazy in the church as far as I'm concerned. But I just started taking steps. I ask people all the time, not do you believe in God, but wouldn't you love to? I think that's a logical question. And so my wife had bought me the book, Case for Christ. I read it, and right away I'm like, this guy's way smarter than I am, and he's came to these conclusions. I see no downside to taking a step forward. And I was at a men's conference yesterday, and they had a statement that said, God's not looking for perfection. He's looking for progress. That just makes sense to me, right? So my Christian faith has been a slow, steady excitement. It just kept growing because I've been engaged. I'm not a good reader, but I read a lot. I listen to a lot of podcast people. There's a lot of garbage on the internet, but there's a lot of brilliant people that answer a lot of profound questions that gave me a lot of substance that I could be confident that I'm on the right path. I mean, just period. I mean, this sounds egotistical, but I talk to people and I think if you don't want what I have, you're a fool as far as I'm concerned. I mean, just simply put.
It's really hard to tell where you stand on things. I've noticed
Well,
that.
it's people say, you look mad. I'm not mad. I'm just serious about some stuff. And it's about time a few men got a little more serious about this.
Yeah, that's right. That's good. Well, Dave, we just appreciate your gift to us here at Daybreak, to another emerging generation of young men in your faith. And I just want to encourage you, if you see this man around here, to make sure you say hello to him. And
Yep.
Dave, we thank you for your time
All right.
today.
Thanks, Jeff.
You got one step down
Whoa.
there. And I realize that, if you're here, if you're watching on Daybreak Live and you say, I'm exploring Christianity, maybe you, like Dave, you've noticed there are maybe what you call religious people, but I think Dave made a great distinction about what it means to really be earnestly seeking after Christ in our life. But here's just a few things to think about. If you're exploring Christianity, I want to encourage you, because I realize that as we're sitting here, I'm looking at all of you right now, and I'm looking into the camera, I'm thinking about all the people watching on Daybreak Live. And I know there's a lot of us that if we were to just to be gut level honest, we are searching. We're trying to find truth. And maybe we're even too afraid to admit that or to talk about it. But this is a great place to explore your faith. So take a step towards learning somewhere in your life. And this is a great place to do that. Invite other people into that process. Don't do it by yourself. If you're exploring your faith, find a place to ask questions. We have a class that's happening called Foundations of Faith that I'll talk about here in a second. It's a place where you can explore Christianity and ask those questions. But then allow yourself to let God be bigger in your mind than you can comprehend. I think what hangs up a lot of people exploring faith is they go, well, I don't really understand this. And they have a question, and that question might be a legitimate question. Sadly, I found that sometimes those questions are just honestly excuses. It's excuse to say, I don't really want to change in my life. But if you're willing to really investigate it, what I want to encourage you to do is to allow God to be bigger in your mind. Here's what I mean by that. If you go, well, I don't understand why God would do this, or this doesn't make sense to me. I think what we often do sometimes is we want to bring God down to our level. We want to put God in our box and make sure that we understand everything. Listen, if you're going to believe in a transcendent God, if you're going to believe in a God that created all this, if you're going to believe in a God that can do maybe what we can't even comprehend, he's got to be bigger than what we are, what we can understand. Does that make sense? So we can't just shrink God down and go, until I understand everything about it. Listen, you'll never have every question answered. I promise you that. But here's what I will also say, that every question that's legitimate, that will help you to find truth and to know that God is real, that he loves you, that this Bible is the inspired word by God himself, every question you need to answer those questions can be answered and will be answered if you seek it. So don't get hung up on, well, I have a question. I tell people all the time, I have no idea how this phone works, but I know it works. There's a lot about faith with that too. So just consider what that might mean. So Peter goes on to talk about these things about getting our minds ready. Here's a couple great resources. Dave mentioned one, Case for Christ. Another great book, and it's a great website, is Cold Case Christianity. If you go to coldcasechristianity.com, if you're an explorer of faith, if you go to that website, look up these books, there's so many resources, but coldcasechristianity.com is a man that I've gotten to know and become friends with. His name is J. Warner Wallace. He lives out in Hollywood, California area. He was a cold case detective in LA County for years, and he began to explore his faith, and he has so many incredible resources on that website. The book is incredible. I've done interviews with him. Great guy, great resource. But again, if you're seeking, you will find it if you seek it. And this is a great place to do it. If you're looking for a place, I mentioned that Foundations course. Contact us. If you want to know more about your faith, if you want to explore Christianity, there are ways to do that here, in safe places where you can ask those questions that maybe you don't feel like you can ask anywhere else, because you need to be talking with other human beings about this faith journey of yours. If you're a believer, let me just encourage you to gird up your mind, be ready, be prepared. That's why these tools and resources are so important. That's why we want everyone to stay engaged in the Bible as often as you can, because it's preparing your mind to be ready for the the things that are happening all around us in this world. So we need to be ready. Peter then goes on to say we need to be willing. That we need to be willing to continue to chase after God and be willing to live a different life. He talks about, are we going to conform our lives? Are we going to conform our will to everything else? Or are we going to find God's will for us that causes us to live a different life? Are we willing to allow our lives to be shaped, not to be conformed like everyone else? You know, he uses words and language there. It talks about patterns, conformity. What pattern are we going to find in our life? And you think about these two patterns. A common pattern of life finds ourselves chasing after what's comfortable, what's convenient, what's easy, what's self-satisfying, and more, what is safe. We live behind the confines of safety. Now, safety is a good thing. I'm all about safety. But sometimes that safety has become, for us, a stumbling block, an obstacle to being willing to risk. Look at this different pattern of life, sacrificial, knowing it's not all about us, challenging. Everything and every message in our world is be comfortable, be safe, let it be convenient. What about challenging? What about difficult? What about selfless? What about living a risky existence? What about going beyond the borders of comfort and stepping into something that might be a little difficult for us? And Peter ends these words to these early believers when he says, "Be holy because I am holy." He's talking about being different. Is your life going to be different? This word holy is definitely a word that you don't hear in the world a lot. It's pretty much associated with religion or Christianity or other faiths where it's like, that's a holy person. What does that mean to be holy? What is Peter talking about here? Well, one of the things that the word holy means in a literal sense is it's set apart for some other use. It might even be something that's the same as everything else. So you might have 10 cups, but you pull out this one cup and that's the special cup. If you're a parent, you know what I'm talking about. Like, your kid's got to have the right cup. You know what I mean? It's like they don't want all the other cups. They want that cup. And that's the special cup. Well, when you're holy, it means that you're just set apart from everything else. That it's used for unique or special or purposes that are different. And we need to live our lives in a world that is calling us to be the same as everybody else. And if you get to know me a little bit, you know that I love sports, and I love following the NBA. It's one of my favorite sports. I love basketball. I talk about it a lot. And one of the most fascinating things to me is when Michael Jordan signed his contract to play pro sports. He had something inserted into his contract that no one else has ever had, and it's referred to as "for the love of the game." So when Michael Jordan signed this contract, it's called "for the love of the game" clause, and here's what that means. Michael Jordan said, when I'm signing my life away to play basketball, when this other team, in a sense, is going to get all my talent, I want to be able to control when and where I play basketball. Because most pro teams want to protect this investment, right? And so it would make sense that if you're throwing millions of dollars into an athlete, that you don't want them out on a playground somewhere, breaking their leg, playing a pickup game somewhere in some neighborhood. But for Michael Jordan, it wasn't about being a professional athlete. It was about love. And so Michael Jordan said, I want to make sure, because I love basketball so much. I don't love it because I'm getting paid. I don't love it because it's a career. I don't love it because it makes me famous. I love it because I love it. And so Michael Jordan said, what I want to do is I want to be able to play basketball whenever and wherever I want. And what we find today is that is such a stark contrast to the sports world today, especially in the NBA, where players are saying, I look up the injury reports and it's like, I'm not even kidding. They'll say, they have a big toe injury, so they can't play. I don't know what that means. I don't know why you can't play basketball if your big toe hurts, but it happens. But all these athletes now are saying, well, I need to rest, I need to take time off. And Michael Jordan was the opposite. He said, I'm going to do whatever I can to play, not because I'm getting paid, but because I love it so much. Does your life reflect those values when it comes to your faith? Are you doing it just out of religious duty? Are you watching on Daybreak Live? Are you here in the house just because it's a thing you feel like you should do because you won't feel guilty? Or are you doing it because of love? Because you want to live a life that's set apart for God? Because you love Him so much? Because you realize what He's done for you? Because you realize you're overwhelmed by how much He loves you? Because He does. Will your life be different? There's a movie, it's an older movie, but it's spoken so deeply to me, and it's called Field of Dreams. It's a powerful, powerful movie. At the beginning of this movie, the main character played by Kevin Costner, his name is Ray Kinsella in the movie, and one of the opening lines in the movie as he's narrating, he says this about himself. I'm 38 years old, and I'm about to become a farmer. I love my family, I love baseball, and I miss New York. But until I heard the voice, I'd never done a crazy thing in my whole life. Until I heard the voice. Are you following the voice? The voice that calls your life to be different. The voice that calls your life to be set apart. Seems like almost every week there's someone, either amongst us or on Daybreak Live, that gives their life to Christ for the first time. It's one of the things we celebrate. It's one of the things that we're all about here at Daybreak, because you'll never know the true meaning of life until you know that voice. That voice that will call you to live a life that's so different than maybe what you could have ever imagined. My prayer for you, leading up to this week and thinking about our time today, is that you'd be ready to be willing to be different. Are you ready to have your life set apart? I want to invite you to stand with me here in the house, and we're going to close in prayer. And my invitation for you today is, do you need to set your life apart for Christ? Every week here in the house, if you're here in person, we have prayer partners that are here that just would love to have a moment to pray with you, because all of us here are dealing with something. But the most important thing is your life ready? Is your life set apart? Have you made that decision? You don't just stumble into it. You don't even necessarily need to feel this great emotion. You might. But will you decide to follow Jesus? Will you decide to give your life and say, I want to put my trust in God with my life? So as I pray today, I'm going to just invite you to bow your heads here in the house. And if that's a decision that you want to make for the very first time, I just want to invite you, before I pray, to just throw your hand up in the air and let me know. That's a decision I want to make today. And I want to especially pray for you today if that's your decision. If you're with us on Daybreak Live, there's someone there waiting to respond to you as well if you want to make a decision. I'm just wondering if there's anyone today that I could be praying for, or those of you on Daybreak Live. Yeah. Anybody else? Yeah. For those of you watching on Daybreak Live or here in the house that raised your hands today, just want to invite you to pray this with me in your heart. God, thank you for loving me. Thank you for revealing your love. Thank you for coming to this earth to show me how much you love me. And I believe that you gave your life for me, and I trust you with my life today. I receive this new life in Jesus' name. And Father, as we think about our lives, my prayer is that we would be ready to be willing to be different. God, today I celebrate those that lifted their hands and recognized their need for you, because for many of us, it was that moment that changed everything. When we came to our senses and said, this is what I need in my life. And so, Lord, I want to pray for those that responded today, that you would continue to give them the encouragement to follow you, Lord. And I just want to thank you for the moments we've had today. Pray that our lives would be different. In Jesus' name, amen. It's been so great to be back with you today. We've missed you. We love you guys. We hope you have a fantastic week. If you responded today, if you want to talk to someone, there are prayer partners here. If you responded, I want to encourage you to stop by the lounge on the way out and pick up a growth guide. Let us walk this journey with you. Have a great day, and I hope you have a great time tonight, whatever you might be doing.